Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week we will be talking about I Shot Andy Warhol. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of violence, firearms, prostitution, mental illness, homophobia, transphobia, guns, gaslighting, machine gun belts, filthy hotel rooms and apartments, chipped paint that is probably full of lead, drug abuse, exploitation, mylar balloons, foul language, homelessness, panhandling, cis male actors portraying trans women, paranoia, copious cigarette smoking, police interrogation, and Andy Warhol once again being a vampire who you should not invite to your cocaine party.
Rena, can you give us a spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources we used in this episode include a great story I found in Artsy called Grappling with the Legacy of the Woman Who Shot Andy Warhol by Alina Cohen. I also reference, and she referenced, a book called Valerie Solanas, The Defiant Life of the Woman Who Wrote SCUM and Shot Andy Warhol by Brianne Fahs. The New Yorker review of Candy Darling, Dream Icon and Superstar by Cynthia Carr, which was written by Hilton Alls and is a wonderful write-up of Candy Darling's life and influence, and a great interview with Jeremiah Newton, who was a co-writer on this film from The Village Voice, and Warhol's muses, the artists, misfits, and superstars destroyed by the factory fame machine. And Rena also read Cynthia Carr's book, Candy Darling, Dream Icon and Superstar. Also, Me by Elton John. And Rena watched a documentary on Candy Darling, and years ago also saw one on Jackie Curtis.
And Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about Failed Murderer, Valerie Solanas, and the movie I Shot Andy Warhol?
Very briefly, Valerie Solanas was born in April of 1936 and passed in April of 1988. She was an American radical feminist, best known for her attempt to murder the artist Andy Warhol in 1968. A little bit of bio information about Candy Darling, who was an American actress best known as a Warhol superstar. She was also a pioneer for trans visibility, inspiring songs by the Rolling Stones and Lou Reed. And she appeared in addition to Andy Warhol movies, theatrical productions by Jackie Curtis and Tennessee Williams, and she passed at the age of 29 from lymphoma that was likely caused by the hormones that she took in order to stimulate breast growth. And she is subject to probably the most glamorous deathbed photo that's ever been taken. And the film I Shot Andy Warhol, 1996 film about Valerie Solanas' life and her relationship with Andy. The film is the feature film directorial debut of one magical director, Mary Harron, and the film stars Lili Taylor and Jared Harris as Andy Warhol. The fact that this is her first feature film is pretty impressive. One of the co-writers is Jeremiah Newton, who was Candy Darling's roommate for years and became the executor and manager of her estate. And from all that I could find, he was a very devoted friend and protected her legacy for the rest of his life. He passed in 2023. The movie grossed $1.3 million. I don't know what kind of budget it had. I couldn't find that. But that said, it was, I would say, just on a personal note, a launch pad for so many people, and also was everything I cared about in 1996. And I would speculate wildly that this movie, Basquiat, Rent, Kids, and Sassy magazine are all the reasons that I am here right now in my current life in New York City. I also adore Mary Harron. I think that she and I would have a lot to talk about. And by that, I mean, I would probably corner her at a party like Valerie Solanas and make her talk to me.
Well, that's better than Valerie Solanas would do, because Valerie Solanas would corner you and talk at you, not make you talk to her.
Well, I think implied in my talking to her is I am talking in her general direction. And she's probably trying to get out of the conversation and looking around wildly, and I am not reading the room.
Looking at I Shot Andy Warhol, we are about to get to that segment that I call a bouquet of caveats for you. Andy and Valerie are not likable because Andy has this distance from people. Valerie is obnoxious and an attempted murderer. It occurred to me that the real protagonist of I Shot Andy Warhol is Candy Darling. And it's about her journey. But then I remembered that we have a Stephen Dorff problem here. So in the 90s, merely having a trans character was a huge deal. And for a very, very long time, coming up to far too recently, and I'm worried it may still happen again when I want to declare it over, for a cis male to portray a trans woman was a way for them to get critical attention and pick up award nominations. Felicity Huffman also played a trans woman in Trans America. I remember in 2006 on the show Ugly Betty, there was a trans woman character, and I read articles about, isn't this inclusion great? The trans female character was played by Rebecca Roman Stamos. So we have the Stephen Dorff problem. The problem is that since the films that we talk about on this show all take place in the past, and since we want to talk about the full 100 years plus of feature filmmaking, that means we're going to be talking about things that show attitudes of the past that are now disgraced, show attitudes that were considered progressive at the time and are now embarrassing, and present times in the past when things were a lot harder. Rather than jettison all possible subject matter, there's a bouquet of caveats for you.
Yes, it's a huge bummer because we give people awards sometimes for acting as if it's incredibly brave for a monster like Jared Leto to put on women's clothing. We're like, here's an Oscar for you for this. First of all, it's not brave because you go home at night and you're Jared Leto and you have a cult, which he does. I don't like it in the same way I don't like fat suits. Mm-hmm. Why are we turning that into someone being a good actor, like because they put on a fat suit or because they're a man and they lost some body fat and shaved their happy trail and talked in a higher pitch, and all of a sudden they're like, that's a great performance. No, it's not. It's not brave. It feels exploitive. I have a lot of problems with it. Like, I sound like Frank Costanza right now. I can't necessarily enumerate all of my problems with it, but I do feel like we need to be better than that. There's plenty of trans actors. There's plenty of non-binary actors. There's plenty of people who can play these parts. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, look who's wearing women's clothing. Oh my God, let's give him an Oscar because usually he's so masculine or whatever.
But I guess, how did this look in 1996 to people? Because there were trans women actors around at the time. Could Mary Harron have gotten funding if she had cast this correctly?
Like, has anybody ever been like heavily into the Stephen Dorff business, and has anyone ever been like, he opens a movie? I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that the more names she could get on board, the better. I don't think Stephen Dorff sells tickets necessarily.
96. It was not objectionable, and today, oh boy, it's something to apologize for. So, we've said in other episodes that Andy Warhol is a vampire that you should never invite to your cocaine party. And where this comes from is Elton John's Me. And I previously talked about this passage in the Elton John episode, but that was 51 episodes ago. So, to describe the scene, and I will explain why this is relevant. Basically, anyone who came through Andy Warhol's orbit alive and with their soul and worldly potential intact was someone who was already somebody who'd already created, who was a star independent of whatever he had going on and just like showed up for the pics and laughed.
It certainly helped also if you were a cisgender male.
One of the things observed in Lawrence Lemur's book, Warhol's Muses, The Artists, Misfits, and Superstars Destroyed by the Factory Fame Machine, is that the only one of the superstars that Warhol did a painting of was Baby Jane Holzer, who could pay for it. To describe Andy Warhol as the vampire that you should not invite to your cocaine party, Elton John and John Lennon were hanging out one evening while Elton John was in New York, and Elton John writes, "One evening in New York, we were holed up in my suite at the Sherry Netherland Hotel, determinedly making our way through a pile of coke, when someone knocked at the door. My first thought was that it was the police. If you've taken a lot of cocaine and someone unexpectedly knocks at your door, your immediate thought is always that it's the police. John gestured at me to see who it was. I looked through the spy hole. My reaction was a peculiar combination of relief and incredulity. John, I whispered, it's Andy Warhol. John shook his head frantically and drew his finger across his throat. No fucking way. Don't answer it, he hissed. And I apologize. I cannot do a Liverpool accent here. I wish I could. On the audiobook, I think Taron Egerton reads that and he can do a Lennon, but I can't. So you're just going to have to imagine it in. So, no fucking way. Don't answer it, he hissed. What? I whispered back. What do you mean don't answer it? It's Andy Warhol. There was more knocking. John rolled his eyes. Has he got that fucking camera with him, he asked. I looked again through the spy hole and nodded. Andy took his Polaroid camera everywhere. Right, said John. And do you want him coming in here and taking photos when you've got icicles of coke hanging out of your nose? I had to concede that I did not. Then don't fucking answer it, whispered John, and we crept back to doing whatever we were doing, trying to ignore the continued knocking of the world's most famous pop artist.
Don't let Andy Warhol come to your coke party.
That's survival there, which the people who hung around Warhol more frequently lacked any real instinct for.
I mean, Andy Warhol is a lot of things, but I would say that probably one of the things that he is most is like the human personification of a kill shelter for kittens.
Yeah, I love kittens.
Who doesn't? But he basically, like, he attracted a lot of people who needed something, and he wouldn't give it to them. He let them stand in his sunlight for a little bit, and then he cast them aside.
I'm sure that there are people out there who can think of more. If I were going to cite who are the real survivors of the factory scene, I would say the four main members of the Velvet Underground. I'm not counting Nico here. And that's because they were independently talented people who had a life, especially Lou Reed and John Cale. They had a life and things to offer in the world and stuff in their biographies about artistic growth before they met him. Especially Lou Reed seems to have had the most positive takeaway from the relationship. And Lou Reed talks about his insight into that Andy Warhol actually had a great work ethic. I am a massive, massive Velvet Underground fan. I have an autographed copy of Lou Reed's Pass Through Fire, the collected lyrics, where I might later in this episode take some lyrics that he wrote from the Songs for Drella tribute album that he and John Cale did together after Andy died as positive takeaways that Lou Reed had from that relationship, where nobody else who was around the factory except Lou Reed seems to have picked up any work ethic. And there's a great little 4-minute video of him talking about that relationship where he talks about Andy's skills as a draftsman. And he talks about how hard Andy worked. Everyone else's takeaway was just, I'm going to do a bunch of drugs and let them film my tits out.
He took a lot of pictures of a lot of people's tits. And a lot of pictures of a lot of cocks, too. Let's be real. I think it's also important to point out, too, that Drella was Lou Reed's nickname for Andy, and it was a portmanteau of Dracula and Cinderella. So Lou Reed had his number.
Lou Reed loved him. Oh, another book I left out of the bibliography at the front. A college friend gave it to me at Christmas junior year. Uptight, the Velvet Underground Story, which was written by Victor Bockris and Gerard Malanga.
Gerard Malanga, we'll get to you.
Yes. So, moving on, I want to refer to Valerie Solanas as a failed murderer, not as radical feminist, because I guess that's a bad impression on feminism. Not just that, but the stereotypes from second wave feminism that we grew up with were they don't shave their legs, they're ugly, they're humorless, and then in the 80s they wore those unflattering suits with the linebacker shoulder pads that nobody could ever hope to pull off unless her name is Sigourney Weaver. And I always considered myself a product of third wave feminism, which was all about, yes, you can love lipstick and heels and still make head of surgery, and eventually devolved into girl power. Then I think there was something called fourth wave feminism that I've heard may have come and gone before I had any idea about it.
I would say that Valerie Solanas was a very troubled soul. I think that it's important that we establish that I'm immensely, and I think you are as well, sympathetic to sufferers of mental illness. She is someone who did suffer greatly from mental illness. And I think there's also like a more empirical tragedy when someone lands in the world too soon where there's not a place for them to thrive, because I think she is a human who got here ahead of her time, as are a lot of the people in Andy Warhol's Merry Band of Misfits. I think that she needed the kind of help that the world couldn't give her at that time period. She also needed acceptance that the world couldn't give her at that time. But also she is so goddamn irritating and discomforting and unpleasant. And bless Lili Taylor, who is such a talented actor. And she is really able to be all of these things in this movie in a pretty unflinching way. Within 30 seconds of this starting, I was like, oh, brother, Valerie Solanas, you are difficult.
If you look at the casting when it came down to getting funding for this, let's see. Valerie Solanas and Martha Plimpton in 1996. They are art house darlings. Jared Harris is, would you call him a Nepo baby at the time, or had he already proven himself?
I think he had already proven himself in like the British pipeline, but this was certainly a breakout for him in the US market.
Michael Imperioli is a couple years away from The Sopranos in this. And so I suppose the main nod to the pop market is Stephen Dorff. So bang, bang, there have been gunshots. And for the record, it is the summer of 1968, and June of 1968 was a crazy month in a crazy summer of a crazy year that society has been regurgitating ever since. The thing about 1968, the being that cud that society as cow is always rechewing, is that a cow chews its cud a finite number of times, and 1968 never stops popping back up. We have found ourselves in 1968 on this podcast more times than I care to count, and I know we pick the movies, so I shouldn't be complaining here. Valerie is told to just get in the elevator. The first time I saw this movie, I loved how brash she was. I guess in my little secure suburbs, I loved how brash she was for announcing herself as a butch dyke everywhere she went.
I mean, she's basically the Joker. Like, she shows up and she gets in your face and she threatens you and makes you feel unsteady, right?
Yeah. And Valerie Solanas is most of the time unlikable. She'll have moments of charisma on here where you're electrified even though you still don't like her. And Andy Warhol is a vampire, which is why I had the idea of, okay, we can look at this from the angle of saying that the real protagonist of the movie is Candy Darling, and then we have the Stephen Dorff problem. But, well, welcome back to the show, Jared Harris, and welcome back to the show, Andy Warhol. You were previously played by Crispin Glover in our currently unavailable first episode on The Doors. Andy Warhol has been played on film by a real murderer's row of great actors and people who independently are icons that have themselves been portrayed by other people. We're probably going to see as many Andy Warhols as Martin Luther Kings on this show as we move toward episode 100 and hopefully episode 200.
Even Dorff got himself an "and" credit in this opening credits, an "and" Stephen Dorff. I have a lot of feelings about him. I had a super duper crush on him in the 90s. I describe him as a Napoleonic bad boy because he's very small. And he did this, one thing I remember well, because I read a ton of interview magazines when I was a teenager. He did this photo shoot with his then girlfriend, Courtney Wagner, who's Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood's daughter, where they're both teenagers. And it was in Interview magazine, and it was one of the most sexualized things I'd ever seen in a mainstream publication. If you were to put together a museum of Sarah is totally white bread straight, if you were going to do an exhibit on such a thing, this would be in that exhibit. And it's certainly a point of citation that I had to use when I was trying to figure out what I was freshman year of college. And I was like, oh, wait, remember that though? Are you interested in hearing any more evidence or no? Probably
Sarah,
not.
I've known you for 20 years. I know you're straight.
Yeah, I'm so boring. So I found him very, very foxy back in the day. I also would speculate based on both things that I found on the internet and interviews I've read with him over the years that he's a really problematic person to have around. And I say this because I do think that he should be a really big star. He's very talented and he's not. He was good on one of those very misbegotten seasons of True Detective. And he was really good in Sofia Coppola's movie Somewhere. I would guess that he's a pain in the ass because that's the only reason that I feel like he doesn't work more, or that he's an intensely self-sabotaging individual. And I did pull up an article that I will put in the show notes by Nikki Swift about the shady side of Stephen Dorff. I remember he was one of the 8,000 actors who auditioned to play Al Pacino's counterpart in Scent of a Woman, the role that went to Chris O'Donnell, and he was bitching about not getting that part and was like, they probably didn't want someone as confrontational as I am. To be fair, Chris O'Donnell is, if you were to give me a diametric opposite of Stephen Dorff, it would be Chris O'Donnell. Also, hot take, he's not pretty enough to play Candy. Candy Darling is beautiful. She had an old movie star face, almost like a Greta Garbo kind of bone structure. She reminds me in some pictures a little bit of Dorothy Stratton, who we talked about, who's also an unbelievably beautiful woman. I think it was 2019 there was word that Hari Nef was going to play Candy Darling in a biopic. I don't know where that stands, but she would be perfect.
The Hari Nef Candy Darling biopic is still in development. Hexville, as of May 2025, she said that they have no money raised, although John Cameron Mitchell was tapped as a producer last year.
That's the right energy.
Stephen Dorff is only believable in the early scenes. Before Candy would have been taking hormones, and also, yeah, he's not pretty enough. The two Almodovar films that I kept thinking of in relation to the crimes of Stephen Dorff were Bad Education and All About My Mother. And trans woman in those movies. And that felt, in both cases, like, especially Gail Garcia Bernal, and that felt like a commentary on all the actors who've used playing a trans woman as a cheap way to make a name for themselves. We are barely a scene into this movie.
Yes. So
to the Solonases at their bar, somewhere that is not New York.
Yeah. They are looking dismayed and confused and disappointed. Did you ever get this look? I always got this look.
I think my mother might have done that when I left the house wearing all black or put on eye makeup. But what I find myself thinking about here is we've reflected a lot on parents of incredibly accomplished children in biopics giving their kids that look. But this is a rare case where I feel like the Solonases giving Valerie that look, like parents giving their child that look, is completely justified.
Yes. And her dad is played in this scene by a super talented actor, Mark Margolis, who you may recognize from Breaking Bad as Hector Salamanca, ding, ding, ding. Wheelchair guy.
Unlike with Elton John's mother, I can't blame Valerie's parents for being unimpressed with her. Cut to the Warhol superstars hanging out at the hospital talking to reporters.
It just was like, oh, Mary Harron, you are a genius, because just watching all of these people like try and function in society, like in day-to-day life, was so wonderful. We see someone bring out his wig. This is a great little like glide through their world. And this is a world that doesn't do well, like when the lights are on.
No, this world was not meant for sunlight.
No. Again, vampires.
Yeah. So we cut to an interrogation room where the cops are questioning Valerie. They are the most chill police we've seen in ages on this show, possibly because they are interrogating a white woman who turned herself in. And I noted here that it must have been nice to be able to smoke during a police interrogation.
I mean, that is how, like, up until 2008, the cops could have broken me in less than 20 minutes is by not letting me smoke.
Yeah.
She's being a little sassy with them. They're asking, where do you come from? And she's like, the river. And then they ask, well, why did you shoot Andy Warhol? And she said, I told you I don't want to get into that right now. Because she doesn't really have the most comprehensive set of reasons for doing this, as we will find out.
Her reasons are in her head and not particularly sane or constructive or logical or any of the things that most people would recognize as warranting violence in the rare cases when we say, you know what, that violence was warranted.
No, and I feel like this movie does a really good job of showing us, like, yes, these are all people of dubious moral compasses, but at no point do we have any justification for her harming him.
We're given a window into her mental state, which we constantly understand as disturbed. Even while this is very much, it's not like, ooh, she's crazy. This is very much a 360-degree, three-dimensional portrayal of someone. So we get a montage of Valerie Solanas's miserable hardscrabble childhood.
She's 28, and she is an old 28. She grew up in Atlantic City, which I think explains a lot. We find out a lot more about her childhood. Her entire young life was very troubled. She was very smart. One of the things that they mention is that she was allegedly sexually abused by her father. And I say, I believe her. There's no record of that, so I'm slapping the allegedly on it, but I believe her. And one of the things the movie doesn't get into is that by the time she was 15, she had given birth to 2 children. One was raised by her mother as her own, in that thing that people used to do back then. And the other one was adopted. That right there is enough to make you crazy.
Nobody writes down, I molested my kid today and has it notarized with photos.
No.
I'm going to take her word on it because it explains everything perfectly.
I totally believe her. But At any rate, she also tells them when she's being asked, like, why you did it, she says, read my manifesto, which same. And maybe we should all have manifestos that we hand out to people so they can find out what we're into and what we believe in when we meet them. Just a modest proposal. We see her go to college. She is a very talented writer, but she's also not a good fit for college in 1954.
I think for a woman to behave this way, to dress and conduct themselves the way that she does in the 1950s, to be so thoroughly herself with what herself is astoundingly brave. And it shows her working at the student newspaper, and someone has sent in an idiotic question about guidance for when to wear a corsage at school events. And I think her reaction of scrawling "fuck you" in block letters on the note is understandable. There's a scene where she's doing some kind of volunteer word exchange psychiatric test with another student, and you see her like coming on to her, and the girl is very uncomfortable as to whether this girl who she throws things down the stairs at was leading her on. I think she's just trying to get her homework done, but has stuff thrown down the stairs at her anyway. In terms of Valerie's intelligence, on her way to shoot Andy Warhol, something they leave out here is that she stopped by the house of 23-year-old, at the time, Broadway producer Margot Faden to try to get Margot to produce her play, Up Your Ass, and she handed Faden a copy of it. So this whole thing where she's making a fuss at Andy later, it is very much... There were many copies of Up Your Ass around. The factory lost a copy. She had copies. She was just nuts. But this woman who'd already been quite successful as a producer starting in her teens, her impression, she listened to Valerie for 3.5 hours, and her impression was of, and this is from Lawrence Leamer again, a brilliant young woman with intelligent, sad eyes, but a tragically damaged person. If only Solonas could pull back a little, asserting a greater measure of sanity, her prospects were endless.
I fell down so many Wikipedia wormholes while we were getting this episode together, and Margot Faden, I just want to mention a couple of cool things about her. She, in addition to being a producer, earned her pilot's license. She established an art gallery in 1969 that became one of the most prolific female-owned galleries in New York City. She exhibited the original drawings and prints of Al Hirschfeld and then became Al Hirschfeld's representative for several decades. There's like some crazy people involved in this film, like, and this story. So I thought that was super cool.
The point of that is that Margot Faden is an extremely accomplished person who can tell when she sees the genuine article, and she saw Valerie's potential if she'd had better mental health. And Faden's impression was also, this woman in front of her was not the new Karl Marx, elucidating themes from a feminist version of the Communist Manifesto. She was more like the savage satirist Jonathan Swift, whose immodest proposal suggested that the Irish could work their way out of poverty by the poor selling their children as food for the rich. So there is that argument that the SCUM Manifesto, and if we have not said so already, SCUM stands for the Society for Cutting Up Men. There is that argument that the SCUM Manifesto is meant to be satirical, but Margot listened to Valerie Solanas for over 3 hours, and Valerie told her everything about her life. Valerie had an answer for every counter-argument about, like, why not to kill all the men. When we say she was intelligent, there's evidence for it.
Everything we hear out of her in this is really coarse, but it's like, just get this girl in an MFA program and get her some medication, and a good doctor. It's sad.
It's noted that part of how she supported herself while going through college was as a sex worker. And we see some black and white footage of her reading from the SCUM manifesto. And I'll say this again, her prose has a force and a drive to it that kind of hits in a way where I occasionally think, yeah, she kind of has a point there. And I want to note here, everyone in this film on the edge of society who would have been dirty looks properly dirty.
Yeah. The SCUM Manifesto might have been the first zine.
Cut to, I don't know if this is supposed to be Washington Square Park or Union Square or Tompkins Square Park, that she is walking around with her friend Stevie. And this is one of the rare occasions when I'm not annoyed by using a composite character as the friend, because Martha Plimpton is super cool.
She is, and she's great in this.
Yeah, and they're talking, and they meet Candy Darling for the first time.
And it's the cold light of day of rewatching this in 2025. I am like, wow, he's not right for this part.
Everyone else in this movie is so good, and he's embarrassing, and that's partially me judging something by today's standards, which I always try to resist doing here, but it's partially that he's doing a 1996 parlor trick here. It's not great. He does show Candy Darling having like mannerisms down from the get-go, like she's already evolved quite a bit, and there's I've read that when Candy Darling went to her draft board, we watched the scene of what Quentin Crisp did at the draft board in World War II, where he just goes in, he's Quentin Crisp, and they're like, right, so Candy Darling went in for the draft board, just burst into tears, and the officer wrote her a 4F.
Candy Darling, also not good army material.
No, I think Quentin would be quite willing about doing what they said. Candy would just...
Yeah. My question is, and again, because Candy Darling was so beautiful, and I know it doesn't have the parlor trick stuntery of casting a male in the role, like, why not cast a woman?
That is how, right. Well, Felicity Huffman, Rebecca Roman. Oh no, remember Kathleen Turner played Chandler Bing's dad on Friends.
Like,
no.
No, I know. I know there's really no way to get around that it is inherently a caricature when you cast most actors in this kind of role.
He looks kind of rough, and at first I thought, well, they probably didn't have the methods they have today, and it's like, no, he just looks kind of rough.
He still looks like Stephen Dorff, like, pulled himself off the floor of Limelight hours before arriving to set and didn't get around to shaving.
Yeah. There's like record in the early days of people seeing her having a 5 o'clock shadow under the makeup, but she got to what that woman in the Almodovar film called authenticity from the photos pretty quickly. Stephen Dorff is doing her a disservice the whole time, and I know that's not how people saw it in 1996, and pretty much anything else here I can say, I can look at it through 1996, looking at 1968 and be okay with it, but this is really jarring. Valerie has no place to stay, so Candy takes her along, and they take advantage of the disabled landlady who cannot chase them up the stairs. The landlady is in a wheelchair and can't chase them up the stairs to get her rent.
Martha Plimpton, also just such a good actress, and she's also like ridiculously cool. Her dad is Keith Carradine, and her mother is Shelley Plimpton, who was an actress. She was in the original Broadway cast of Hair. Like, I'm like, how cool are you? What's it like? Right?
Yeah, I feel sorry for Martha Plimpton's character, Stevie, that she's stuck hanging out with Valerie. So Valerie writes a very funny guide to panhandling as a career option for young ladies. Valerie veers between being irritating and electrifyingly alive. There's a scene of her and Steve where Valerie saying, like, I just want to find some, like, low-down broad, and, like, it's a good interaction. I like the interaction between her and Stevie. And there's that film with her saying, again, one of these moments where she almost gets me on her wavelength, where she complains about a woman's role in the world, and she says, the female function is to, in other words, create a magic world.
The SCUM Manifesto is a really interesting piece of writing. It swings for the fences. She picks up a great dude who pays her and Stevie $25 to watch them have sex while he masturbates. It's very reminiscent. Have you seen Clute?
I have not. I've been meaning to for decades.
It's so wonderful. There's a moment where she's having sex with him and she's like looking at the time in this, and there's a scene in that movie where Jane Fonda does the same thing to a dude. She's like, oh, love her, looking at her watch. It was reminiscent of that.
Watching the sex scene, they're faking. This couldn't be a faker orgasm if they were pretending that scissoring is real. This is like when you want to get it over with so that he'll leave or go to sleep and you can get back to playing Candy Crush or looking at cats on Instagram or whatever the hell it is that you'd rather be doing. We see her just kind of like looking at the wall and smoking while he pumps away with her at her after she's like had loud fake orgasmic sex with Martha Plimpton. It's demeaning.
It's a really icky scene.
Yeah. And of course there's a scene where he likes being beaten. The room that they're in is disgusting. There's like sheets of paint peeling away off the walls, and both layers of the paint are filthy. And she takes the rest of his money out of his wallet on the way out of the apartment, and I don't blame her. And Mary Harron and Lili Taylor did a good job here of showing what sex with men is like through Valerie's eyes.
Mary Harron is so good at this, because I feel like she did this extraordinarily well too in American Psycho. She did like show us the terror of being female in that movie in a really thoughtful way. As Valerie's leaving, she stumbles onto an Andy Warhol film shoot.
And she's immediately intrigued.
I don't know why, because of all the things that Andy Warhol did, his movies are the worst. And she sits down and starts writing a play, and she says, I dedicate this play to me. And I'm like, oh, bless Valerie. You are a handful.
The play that she's writing is called Up Your Ass. And I almost start to like Valerie here because of the zest with which she reads her dedication. And these moments of almost enjoying her presence will become fewer as the film goes by and her mental state degrades.
She ends up showing up at the factory, and everyone's so insufferable there.
The people at the factory are all super vapid, and the way that Valerie gets there is that Candy mentions that the previous night she was at Max's Kansas City, which was the swingin' place.
I'm so sad that I never got to go there. There wasn't a chance I was going to get to go there unless someone brought me in like a Bjorn, but still, it sounded really cool.
Candy had met Andy Warhol there, and Valerie mentions that she wants Andy to produce her play, because if she has an idea, she's just going to latch on. There's no reason for her to think he'd do it, but she thinks he should. She tags along with Candy to the factory, and it feels like entering a church. Like, everything is painted silver on the insides, and via an overheard phone call, we get a quick sense of what life at the factory is like, where people who are supposed to show up sleep in, and it's 3 p.m. And Michael Imperioli, welcome to the show. He's playing a character named Ondine, and he's being an asshole to Andy's, we're going to assume, I think, no, there's record of it, poorly paid assistants at the factory.
Holy crap, is Ondine a monster. We'll get to it, but Jesus, what a miserably not kind person. Andy is what we've always seen Andy to be, which is distant, mean a little bit, kind of bitchy in his own space. We see her meet randomly Maurice Gerardius, who is a publisher of smut. He published Lolita when no one would publish that. He published Naked Lunch, a bunch of other books. He would like her to publish a book.
She meets him while she's panhandling, and he's intrigued by her. She monologues for him about sex works and this guy who wanted her to walk on him while wearing golf shoes.
Her hustle is exhausting. It's just like exhausting to watch her like wear people down.
Yeah, it's annoying. You watch her hustling people for change, and I guess I'm reminded of something that George Orwell wrote in Down and Out in Paris and London, where he wrote, "It isn't that beggars don't work hard at begging. You'll see beggars out there in all kinds of weather, in the rain, begging for 16, 18 hours a day. The reason why beggars are poorly paid for the hard work they're doing is because they are poorly remunerated, because they are performing a function that is of no use to society."
She is a very confrontational beggar, the likes of which we haven't seen in New York in some time. I would put it in the category of if you have been to San Francisco and had someone ask you for money, someone like gets into your physical space and demands that you give them money, it's an assault on your senses. She's a stressful person to spend time with. Again, Lili Taylor is really, really, really good in this movie because she captures all of these dimensions.
She captures when Valerie will say something brilliant and you start to enjoy her. She captures just how annoying Valerie must have been to know.
It's kind of funny that like the Dorff performance would get the credit for being really fearless, because there's like, if you want to talk about fearless, it's playing a woman this dislikable, unpleasant, and coarse and difficult, and bring to the surface all these other attributes. Because as I said, she's kind of like the Joker. She manages to make you feel very unsettled and very uncomfortable in this movie, and she's playing a real person, not a comic book villain.
Yeah, and I don't think she sent dead animals to any of her co-stars.
She probably went home and like did her grocery shopping and folded her laundry, because women just do the work. Also, my favorite part of this meeting with Gerodius is when he's like, maybe you'll write a bestseller and you'll never have to work again. And I'm like, oh, the 60s. You used to be able to do that.
I think that's his pitch. I don't think it actually worked that way. People who wrote a book still had to write another book a few years later to keep up a lifestyle.
But you could make real money as an author back then if you hit it big.
Back to the factory, Andy shows up and they're working on the Brillo paintings. So you see his process with making the assistants do a bunch of work at executing his ideas.
Yeah. Jared Harris is, I think, probably my favorite Andy Warhol.
He's definitely my favorite Andy.
Yeah, he really gets him. And I think like we've discussed this kind of a bit already, but he does, like, he's pretty callous. He's good at casting people in his life and then throwing them aside when he's done with them. I'm gonna make it our Jim Jones moment of the week. He was that very special kind of person who could bring you in and could compel astonishing loyalty from people without returning the favor, even in the slightest. And I guess that leaves me to ask you, is the factory a cult?
I feel like Andy's not up there making speeches. There isn't that quality that we think of in cult leaders, but the people around, yeah, they act super culty. I asked you, let's look at the criteria for what makes something a cult. And you sent me this description: absolute authoritarianism without accountability.
Check.
Zero tolerance for criticism or questions.
Check.
Lack of meaningful financial disclosure regarding budget.
Check.
unreasonable fears about the outside world that often involve evil conspiracies and persecutions. That's not Andy.
No,
That's
I mean, I think like
druggies
there
around
was,
him.
yeah, I think there was probably a general like malaise about leaving in the sunlight because of the drugs, but I wouldn't say that there was necessarily a sort of collective conspiracy. Like they didn't seem to be troubled by the cops or authority. Like I would almost describe them as like sort of like nihilists.
Yeah, so I guess this list goes on. We'll link to it in the show notes, but the final things here are a belief that the leader is right at all times.
Check.
A belief that the leader is the exclusive means of knowing truth or giving validation.
Check.
Yeah, and Lou Reed and the members of the Velvet Underground, again, not Nico, are, as I said, a rare case of individuals surviving the factory with themselves intact or having things in their life that were more than Andy. Viva gave birth to Gabby Hoffman, but that's not like having a hit. That's not like writing dozens of classic songs. I might also cite Jim Carroll here.
He had some rough years.
He had some rough years. I do love Forced Entries.
So she calls the factory, and faux Edie Sedgwick picks up the phone when she calls, and Valerie wants to drop off a copy of Up Your Ass. She only has 2 copies. And I'm like, type a second copy for yourself. Like, if that's the only means of production of another copy, like, you should not just have 2. At any rate, Edie's like, yeah, drop it off. Feedy, I guess I should call her.
Yeah, I don't think this is even like Ingrid Superstar, whose thing was that Edie was gone, so they were going to have someone who was like pseudo Edie just to prove that there was nothing special. But Edie Sedgwick is long gone from the factory at this point. The time that she was around, it wasn't even all of 1965. It wasn't even a full year. It's just, like most years of the 60s, a year that has lived decades longer than it actually was in the American mind. Edie was still living at the Chelsea and doing drugs with lots of people who were still around the factory. She just wasn't there anymore. There's different stories on how many copies she had that appear in various books.
Andy is giving an interview where he's being so obnoxious.
Yeah, this reporter needs to figure out a way to ask Andy more detailed questions that he can't cop out of, but it's probably a lost cause because he's Andy Warhol. He's not going to say anything genuinely insightful. He's going to give you a bunch of vacuous... I'm not even going to try here.
Yeah. And then we cut to a production of Up Your Ass in a diner. The less said about this, the better.
Yeah, this play makes me dry heave. I hate it when people talk about turds.
Theater being thrust upon you is always kind of a nightmare. And if you're in that diner, theater is being thrust upon you.
You don't want to hear this while you're trying to eat something.
I don't want to see a show unless I want to see a show.
She's putting on dinner theater.
I am fine with dinner theater. I need to be a consenting party in the theater experience. I will not have theater happen to me.
Yeah. So back to the factory. The superstars and Andy are sitting on a couch reading the play.
They don't care for it.
Up Your Ass was eventually found and produced. And this, I guess, Bridget Berlin says it's way too disgusting even for us. I liked the actress who was playing her.
And
yeah.
Valerie calls because she wants to get her copy back, and she finally goes to the factory to see Andy, and he's like, your play is so dirty.
Yeah, so she introduces herself to Andy, and this actually happens. He said, we thought you were a lady cop, so she says, here's my badge, and she drops her pants. So she does a screen test. So a thing here about Andy Warhol, aside from what Lou Reed mentioned that people cited about Andy actually doing work, even though nobody around him, very rarely did anyone around him actually have the talent or gumption or drive to build anything on their own. Also, Andy Warhol lived with his mother and took her to church on Sundays.
I mean, that's sweet.
Yeah.
we see them watching some of the screen tests, and the casual cruelty is astonishing, particularly from Ondine. The meanness of this group of people as they try and outdo each other with meanness is really kind of agonizing to witness.
Valerie is just thrilled to see herself on screen. Here's the question, like, Andy could have thrown her out if he'd wanted to. He could have, like, people would do whatever he said. And it had me wondering the whole time, like, does he put up with her? Because he rarely meets anyone who's genuine and has conviction. And I will say this for Valerie, like, she believes everything she's saying, and she has drive behind it. A note here that Candy's friendship is pretty priceless because Valerie is not respectful to her all the time. And Candy is quite supportive.
And she moves into the Chelsea Hotel, and she has decided that she will make a movie, and a young man shows up to audition.
This guy, Jeremiah Newton, is in the Candy Darling documentary, and he seems like a minor saint.
Yes. And he's the one who would later become the executor of her estate.
One thing I noted here, it seems like people in I Shot Andy Warhol seem to get around the city disorientatingly fast in response to phone calls or situations where I don't understand if there's slightly shuffling time within a day or what's happened exactly, because Jeremiah comes right over. I don't, just based on downtown Manhattan geography, and she doesn't have money for the subway or a car. So I'm not clear on how anyone is getting anywhere at pace. And even if people could get a taxi, there's traffic. So as a New Yorker, aware of all the square mileage of blocks, I'm not clear what's going on here time-wise, but that's just a note.
Yeah, the factory was on Union Square in 68. So even still, real like Los Angeles car chase geography that they're doing, where it's kind of magical how they get around.
Yeah, nobody ever gets on the subway in this. I don't know if we see a bus. We never see any signs of public transit. Anyway, we're in a diner scene where Valerie is talking to Jeremiah, and Valerie reveals herself to be a proto-TERF, which stands for Trans-Exclusive Radical Feminist.
Yeah, that's your second wave feminist for you there. A lot of people are mean to Candy in this movie in a way that's like Andy's mean to Candy in a way that has me wondering how true it is. But then again, Andy wasn't particularly nice to anyone.
Remember, Andy Warhol is a vampire who you should never allow into your cocaine party.
Yes. We cut to a factory party, and we're seeing people fight about drugs. We see Bridget again, a little bit of Bridget Berlin background, talking about why she has access to so many different amphetamines, because her mother has long wanted her to be thinner than she is and to look like a lady. And she was one of the many women from the factory who was a socialite. We hear Andy speculating on everyone's wealth and what they can possibly get for them. We also meet a band that I will call the Satin First Floor. This is actually Yola Tango, and less famous, but still notable member of the Velvet Underground, John Cale, actually did the score of this film.
Bravo to Lou Reed for having the integrity to skip an exposure opportunity here. Lou Reed would not let them use any of his music in this movie, and what he had to say about it was, no, Valerie Solanas shot my friend, and I'm not letting you use my music in a movie about her.
Yeah, I respect that.
His whip dance to Yola Tango, trying as hard as possible to sound like the Velvet Underground.
They do try. The movie's soundtrack is pretty bonkers. A lot of songs, quote, inspired by the film on the soundtrack, which explains why you don't hear many of them. I owned this soundtrack because, and this is me sharing information that I'd rather not share, but honesty is wonderful. I had a huge obsession with Jewel in the 90s. And Jewel sings, I know, this is embarrassing. Jewel sings the song Sunshine Superman, the Donovan song on the soundtrack. I did think she was deep. I realize she's not, and I also was not. So it's all fine, and I am now on I don't support Jewel Kilcher at this point because she doesn't believe in vaccines, and I only like to be around people who believe in science. But anyway.
The Warhol hangers-on in the back room are making some kind of mandala or floor mosaic out of pills. Valerie is trying to push her manifesto on people, and nobody wants it.
I gotta say, like we never go to any fun parties on this podcast. I used to think like that I would want to go to an Andy Warhol party, and I don't think that I actually do want to go to one. Like between this and The Doors and Factory Girl, it's just so many insufferable people.
Most parties are just standing around pretending that you enjoy small talk. And small talk I hate small talk so much.
Valerie's trying to foist her manifesto on people at a party and is failing to read the room or the vibes. She is that person at the party who you cannot shake. And a note on this is that from Brianne Fahs, the professor who's a professor of women and gender studies at Arizona State, and she wrote the book that we mentioned earlier about Valerie. She said, Andy created women as offshoots of the male imagination, something Valerie could never and would never live up to. Which indicates that she was never really a fit for what he was trying to accomplish with the factory. I think like you could go so far as to say that the way that he liked his women was just absolutely not in line with a woman with opinions.
He is as bad as a straight man.
Pretty much. Nevertheless, he keeps her around more than even the movie really shows.
It seems like he puts up with quite a bit from her.
I think like it even went farther than what we see in the movie. We see a woman caressing a Mylar balloon, and this made me wonder, like, you know, he has a lot of balloons around a lot. Like, does Andy Warhol go to Party City? Where does he get his balloon stock? Because he has so many of them.
I don't think that Andy picks those up himself. He has low-paid labor get them, and I'm going to assume they were all sniffing the helium tank, so probably they had to get a lot of helium, but Andy's not doing any of that himself. And yeah, so back at the party, Andy looks bored with all of these vapid people, and he and Valerie, and I think, you know, they both have that sense of being wallflowers. He looks bored, and he and Valerie have a loaded glance exchange across the crowded room to, do you believe in magic? And she and Andy sit on the couch, and she reads to him from the SCUM manifesto. And they relate around the boredom of sex. And I'll note here that Warhol's lovers found that he hated being touched.
How'd that work? You don't have to explain it to me. I'm just throwing that out there. How did that work?
I can't imagine dating Andy Warhol. I don't know. Oh my God, talk about hating small talk. He doesn't want to make Valerie a superstar at any time. She doesn't want to be one anyway. And again, I'm back to wondering what Valerie would have done with her life if she'd been about 30% less nuts.
We see her out on the street, like, thrusting copies of the SCUM manifesto at people, and it's like, did you ever run into like the deaf people who try and scam you on the subway?
Oh my God, I freaking hate that. Like, no, I'm not paying you money for your little thing with the sign language. I don't need to learn sign language. I want you to have not laid this guilt trip on me. Thank you. Yeah,
she's like one of those people.
There are kids at Harvard from 300-year family fortunes who act less entitled than she does. Mm. And we have this morning after scene of Ondine getting rid of the Mylar balloons on the fire escape. You see her asleep on the couch the morning after. She runs into Gerodius, who shares her distaste for paying rent on time. And she says that she's ready to write a novel. And she somehow pushes her way into what appears to be the back room at Max's Kansas City, where they're all having dinner, and she's pushing the manifesto on people for 50 cents to $1, but for Andy, it's free. And this speaks to my theory on the inverse ratio of free stuff, which I first thought of this about 20 years ago in relation to Academy Award presenter gift bags that I read about. And it's my belief that there is an inverse ratio inherent in free stuff, namely that your likelihood of receiving free stuff is inverse to your need for free stuff.
Once again, like, we're seeing that one-sided loyalty with Andy. Like, oh, I'll give this to you for free. And he's like, I'll take a shit on you and you'll love it.
He says, oh, this is so nicely typed. And he offers her work typing. Like, again, that work ethic that Lou Reed talked about. Like, he's willing to give her actual work. I don't know how well he'd pay her. I don't know if it would be competitive with what secretaries earned in the city.
I didn't take that as anything but him making fun of her.
No, I took that as him offering actual typist work to her.
I took that as him like being hurtful and looking at it and being like, look how neatly typeset your thoughts are. And they sort of like force her out of this event. And then they're also being kind of mean to Candy here too, which I thought was interesting.
So I take it as that he was offering her work, but I also thought that for someone who doesn't believe in handouts, he was always happy to let anyone else get the dinner bill for him and his troupe. He says to her, oh, Valerie, get a job. But he offers her $25 to be in his movie. So where was the bit that I found in this book? No matter what I did, it never seemed enough. He said that I was lazy. I said that I was young. He said, how many songs did you write? I'd written 0. I lied and said 10. You won't be young forever. You should have written 15. It's work.
Yeah.
That's what Lou Reed wrote in a song from Songs for Drella. The title of the song is Work, but also there's this song called Small Town that they start the album with, where it has the line I love. There's only one good use for a small town. You hate it, and you know you'll have to leave. Anyway, it's the next day. They're filming at the factory, and is this supposed to be Viva or Ultraviolet who's being impossible and screaming naked? And
I thought it was Viva, but
I thought it was Viva too. But Valerie has shown up to work cogent, and she actually gives one heck of a performance for a Warhol film.
God, Andy's films are the worst.
They are, but we'll call it the beat my meat scene, and she's great in it.
She's at the top of the stairs and she's giving a speech that ends with beat my meat.
She wants to get rid of this guy. It doesn't matter that she grabbed his ass in the elevator. She's like, I gotta beat my meat. Get out of here. She has this like charisma with the camera in it, and she's natural, which is not something that you see around there at all. And we have some more fiscal squabbling. And yeah, Andy was stingy, but none of these people would be anyone you'd pay attention to without him. Except Lou Reed, etc., like we said before.
Yeah.
Candy, again, being a generous, beautiful soul, loans Valerie this red satin dress, and she dresses Valerie up for the meeting with Gerodius. She does Valerie's makeup. She's a gracious, sincere, true friend. And again, I think she put up with Valerie because they were misfits together from way back. And the lipstick she mentions using is Revlon's Fire and Ice, which is red, and it's been around since the 50s. So she's at the restaurant with Gerodius. She doesn't know how to eat a lobster, and he has to help her, and the lobster matches her dress, and I'm guessing that she probably ordered it because she's a freeloader, and it would have likely been the most expensive thing on the menu. Or if she grew up at the seaside, maybe there were lobsters around if she grew up in Atlantic City. but she doesn't know how to eat it herself, so maybe it's something she saw rich people eating. She has no name. He has no reason to be confident she'll deliver, other than force of personality, and the deal's for 2 novels, not for him to print a play and a manifesto. He's a sleaze, but he says $500 in 1968, so I'm assuming, depending on what you consider to be expenses and certain non-transferables, it's going to come out somewhere in the mid 4 figures or so.
Even still, that's probably about how much some people make for their books now.
For a first book from a small publisher, when you're nobody, everything she's mentioning in this contract seems entirely standard for a no-name person working with a small publisher.
Exactly.
As someone who has been around the New York media world for decades, that's what I make of this.
But she has buyer's remorse.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I thought she didn't care about capitalism.
Everybody cares about capitalism. Your ideals aren't going to feed you. Oh, yeah. So she goes over to the factory to pace about this deal that she doesn't like.
I'm watching Andy watch her. She has like a crazed energy that she like people around the factory are languid. If they act energetic, it's because they're on speed. In real life, Andy had a lawyer that he knew look at the contract, and the lawyer said it was not legally binding. But that's not the story Valerie is telling herself.
Ondine is such an asshole. He's really mean to her, and he's like, you think you're starting a revolution, and you're not. And he's just really bitchy about it. And it's funny because the Andy that they're putting forward here is one who is saying that the written, that publishing is dead, but he would go on to write a book not long after this called A Novel, and it is 451 pages long, and it sounds nearly unreadable. Because it is a nearly word-for-word transcript of conversations recorded by Andy and Ondine.
Okay, that's actually more than I expected. When you said it was called A Novel, I thought of his movie Empire, which is hours of film of the Empire State Building. So I assumed that the whole book was the letter A, space, A, space, A, space. Just the letter A appearing over and over again, maybe with a period here and there. That's what I thought it must be.
No, it's something far more sinister.
So the deal here is nobody wants what anyone with any passion here is pushing. Valerie is pushing the manifesto on the street. She's desperate for people to listen to her. She keeps dropping the price. They're saying, hey, it's free. And I wouldn't take a copy of the SCUM manifesto for free either. I do not want my life changed in the manner in which Valerie Solanas would change it.
Same. I will say, though, that I was very susceptible to other people's ideas when I was a teenager. So I probably would have taken one of her manifestos and then disappeared into the underground.
Valerie gets violent at the factory. She knocks over a table, and it seems like this is a lot. Like, he doesn't have to have her around, and she is, as Ondine tells her later, she is excommunicated. She can no longer get through to Andy on the phone.
Next thing you know, she's mimeographing the SCUM manifesto, and she meets this group of proto-Bernie bros called the Motherfuckers.
So the Motherfuckers are some white boys who are full of themselves. I do not find their plan to dump garbage all over Lincoln Center remotely groovy, as Valerie terms it. I love Lincoln Center, but I love that the soundtrack here is a punked up version of Summertime Blues, like, because these are fine-featured white boys and they can't be more than a few years out of a suburb.
No.
This is all an affectation. And this, I'm going to call him a motherfucker because he says they're the motherfuckers. This motherfucker actually pays her $1 for the manifesto. And this feels like the first time that I've seen anyone pay her for her writing. I look at the Motherfuckers and I have the same thought that I have whenever I see a crust punk, which is, I bet your dad works for Monsanto.
And We see another dirty apartment. Also, welcome to the show, Justin Theroux. I don't know if we'll see him again at any point.
They're getting high and playing with guns. Great.
I also feel like it's worth mentioning here that there were SCUM meetings. This was a little bit more successful adventure than is portrayed in the film, and I only say successful in this sentence because, like, she is basically, like, shown going around, like, shoving this in people's faces, like the deaf people in the subway. Mm-hmm. But, you know, like, there were meetings such as they were.
That's actually a fun moment in American Horror Story Cult, one of those seasons of American Horror Story where it feels like Entertainment Weekly probably gave the episodes between a C- and a straight B, maybe a B+ here and there. But they do show meetings where they talk through the people who are showing up. Anyway, so Valerie, Stevie, and Jeremiah and Candy are in Candy's room watching some fashion shows, and we see feminists picketing the Miss America pageant. And Jeremiah says that he can get Valerie on TV because she's mad that the bra burners are getting attention on TV because she thinks they stole her thing.
Jeremiah does get her on a TV show. It's the Ellen Burke Show. It's a real show. It sounds like a nightmare. Like, Alan Burke walked so Morton Downey Jr. could run, so Rush Limbaugh could ruin American society. Alan Burke is played by Peter Friedman, who's a great actor. He was on Succession. He has done a ton of Broadway. And he's a real dick to her.
Alan Burke is a hack. He's horrible. He's like Glenn Beck without the talent. And it's a bad faith deal going on here for the interviewee.
Sick burn, unless they go into it. Glenn Beck without the talent? Yikes.
He's so patronizing, and she's making an honest effort to make a case here with what she has available. And honestly, I think she has every right to want to beat him up, and she does, like, chase him. And
yes,
yeah, he treats her with zero dignity. It's horrible. And I don't think Jeremiah had any idea what was going to happen here, because you see him putting his face in his hands, and she beats up poor sweet Jeremiah. She thinks that Andy set her up. We know that she's not thinking clearly. Then she insults Candy and calls her Jimmy. And if you want an example of why it's called dead naming, watch how broken down Candy is in this scene. And she threatens Gerodius. Then she begs Stevie to let her stay. Her mental state has been getting worse and worse. Valerie is boring Martha Plimpton to death. But the thing that finally makes Stevie kick her out is that Valerie pulls out the gun that she got from the motherfuckers.
My one piece of advice I can always offer is if someone pulls out a gun, you should kick them out. And then she goes to Gerodius's office and says she is going to kill him, but he is not there.
In between, there is the thing with Margot Faden, the Peter Pan producer, which we don't see here. It would be one person showing up for one scene, and it would make the movie 10 minutes longer. And I think having someone react to her, as Faden describes reacting, it would reduce that sense of outsiderness. So she makes her way to the factory. Andy gets out of the car, and he lets her back in with this amicable, "Oh, hi, Valerie, we haven't seen you in a long time."
Yeah.
Which is weird, because we know that when someone's out at the factory, they're out, but she was never quite properly in. I'm surprised that she's allowed back in, or maybe it's that Andy is conflict averse. I think here he's being as close to nice as he can get, because he's welcoming. He's like, "Oh, look, everyone, Valerie's back." And he mentions that she has makeup on, and like he expresses concern that she's wearing layers and layers of clothing. So why did he put up with her exactly?
I mean, I would speculate that, like, that, you mentioned conflict averse. I don't think he's very good at fighting his own battles. I would guess that, like, one of the things that a lot of the other people shared, like, like sociological way, the same sort of understandings of what the rules were. Andy kicks you out and you exile yourself. You are shamed. You are shunned. You do that because that is what happened to you. I don't think Valerie knows to do that. And I think that it would be challenging for him to not have someone sort of like minding the rules that he's laid down. This is just another, read of the situation. I didn't take it as a particularly welcoming. I took it as him being sort of like droll and like, oh, look, Valerie's back.
Maybe that I don't read people very well.
It's not a particularly easy person to read either, because like there's a detachment to him. You never see him in a sincere moment with anyone in any of the media that we've seen him in. He almost sounds like he's observing what is happening to him rather than experiencing it.
Why did he keep her around? Not in this scene, but previously.
This is a very uncharitable read about Andy Warhol. I kind of think he's a little bit of a troll. He's one of those people who is, in addition to being the Pied Piper, also someone who's very interested to see what is going to happen. It tracks with what you were saying about how he didn't like to be touched by intimate partners, which again, don't know how that works. But anyway, he was so remote. There's that coldness of never letting anything real out. Anytime like someone shoots you, it does involve like a failure of imagination. I'm sure that he also wouldn't presume that someone would do something that crazy.
Yeah, what you said about that he might enjoy, because she is a live wire and everyone around him is so languid.
One of the things that I've always taken from anything that I've seen about the factory, read about the factory, is there is this sort of like Roman, like Circus Maximus kind of thing happening with him, where all of these people are there to fill a role and to entertain him. And, he says it's for the art, and maybe it is for the art, but it's also like everyone is there to kind of put on a show for him and to be the thing that he wants them to be. And I think maybe he liked watching Ondine attack Valerie, or maybe he liked to watch like that kind of interplay, like that sort of drama nourished him and fed his art. I think, just to be like completely frank, I think he got off on the drama. I think he got off on other people's discomfort and pain, and I think that he kind of enjoyed that.
He doesn't strike me as someone who gets off on anything.
I think like he was amused by all of it. I don't know. Andy Warhol's a little bit of a mystery to me.
That's something that he mined. Like, beyond all that, there's the lonely little boy from Pittsburgh, and when he would get invited to these parties uptown, he would sit down and it's the pretty woman scene. What are all these forks and spoons for? So he'd not eat anything and then say, I only eat candy.
Everyone has a way that they would handle that situation. And his way was to be like, let me cultivate an eccentricity.
This inscrutability. But Valerie is standing there with a bag, and Andy is on the phone with Viva, who in fact is away. She's filming a scene in Midnight Cowboy, and Valerie shoots several times into Andy, into one other person. And I thought, like, do we say attempted assassination or attempted murder here? Because how famous do you have to be assassinated instead of just murdered?
A target of an assassination is, according to the internet, public figure, leader, or individuals who hold significant power or influence. So assassination would fit.
But that means there's a line in fame below which you are murdered and above which you are assassinated. Because otherwise it's just first-degree murder, unless you're famous. Like all posthumous awards and accomplishments, being assassinated is not an accomplishment you can enjoy. It's kind of useless. The one aide left standing, whose name I can't remember, begs Valerie on his knees to just leave, and it's like, it takes a gunshot to get a genuine emotional display out of these people.
She turns and she leaves, and she walks up to a police officer and hands him the gun and says, I just shot Andy Warhol. And we're back at the beginning of the movie.
So she says that Andy had too much control over my life, but other people around Andy said that the idea of him trying to control anyone was absurd. He's not trying. People just glom on. and he's not thinking about it. It's all her here. He couldn't care.
It's her choice, but that's not what I mean in that, like, your mind is your mind and sickness is sickness.
It's her gray matter making an interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah,
He'd
it's
get
her.
bored trying to control anybody.
He doesn't care.
Yeah.
I think he appreciates that these people keep showing up for him day after day, but I think, like, everyone around him has a disposability. If they decided to stop being influenced by him, then he would just welcome in another person and give them a new name, and that would be that.
Well, except for his little old immigrant mother who he takes to church.
Yes.
And lives with.
He contains multitudes, but certainly his public persona was pretty chilly.
Yeah, so we hear from the report at the hospital. She says that she is glad that he is in the hospital, and she hopes he dies, but she doesn't understand why he hasn't been to see her if he forgives her. And you see him in surgery. And we cut to a scene of Candy making plans for a post-op life as a heterosexual woman, which she is. But I don't understand why she's reading a letter to Stevie out loud in a room alone. And we get some quick scenes of everyone's fate. So Maurice is stuck publishing the SCUM manifesto when what he wanted were 2 marketable novels, not a play and a 50-page manifesto. That is what she signed for. And we see Andy having some PTSD in the line at Studio 54. And I am appalled that Valerie Solanas only got 3 years in a mental ward.
We didn't have the tools to help her be a well member of society.
If you shoot someone with a plan to murder, I feel like you should be put away in a much less accessible place for much longer and have to make a much more convincing demonstration of sanity and remorse to be released. Anyway, the movie's over, and I'm disgusted that they only gave her 3 years of mental institution.
And I'm not 100% convinced that it helped her. Like, she seemed like she was unwell for the rest of her life. It sucks to be everybody at the end of this, though, is the thing.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Andy is never quite well again. He would spend the rest of his life in pain and discomfort from the shooting.
There are photographs, and also if you look at the Alice Neal painting of how sliced up his torso was from everything, it's appalling, and just the macabre way in which he was put back together. But nobody comes away better off from having known Andy Warhol except Lou Reed. So, is there any awards talk this week?
There's a little bit of awards talk. This got generally positive reviews. It won several awards, mostly out of America. So the Gijón International Film Festival won Best Art Direction. Seattle International Film Festival won a Best Actress Award for Lili Taylor. She also won a Best Actress Award at the Stockholm Film Festival, and also received an Outstanding Performance Award at the Sundance Film Festival. This was also nominated for an Independent Spirit Award for Best First Feature, and won the Bronze Horse at the Stockholm Film Festival, and the Sundance Film Festival gave it the Grand Jury Prize for Dramatic Feature. It definitely put a bunch of these people on the map, and is a pretty astonishing first feature for Mary Harron, and set the template for the kind of art she would explore throughout her career so far, in terms of looking at sort of like secular cults and hive mind and various like ways that feminism and being a woman present itself in this world. She's made so many interesting things, and I just like her so much. This is a really great shot out of the gate in terms of what kind of things that she was going to do, and kind of a thesis statement for what she intends to accomplish as a director and a writer. So very impressed by this one.
Cool. So, some bits of dialogue I wrote down. I had quite a few. First, I suppose 3 p.m. is early for some. Same. Then, all I know is I want a piece of the groovy world myself. And then something the waitress yells when they're trying to do the dinner theater. Cut. You're in a restaurant, not on Broadway. Order something or get out. There's something that Candy says that I have remembered for years and years and years, and I knew it was from here, where they're talking about Valerie, and she says she couldn't pay her rent, so she moved somewhere more expensive, which that sounds straight out of Dorothy Parker.
Yeah.
Also, something Valerie says to Jeremiah when he shows up to audition, and the reading that he does is awful, but the character is so lovable, especially given what we know about this guy. Valerie says to him when they go to read in a dark hallway, I'm not going to kill you. I just don't want to take you to my room because it'll damage my reputation. Also, I liked, oh, Valerie, get a job.
Oh.
And then finally, something Valerie says to one of the motherfuckers, I couldn't pay any rent, but I could fuck you sometimes.
I mean, it's a pretty quotable movie.
It's a good script.
Yeah, it really is. Love all your choice dialogue.
Thanks. And they make really good use of Valerie Solanas' own writing.
Yes. Yes, I thought that this was a movie that cared a lot about its people, even though they weren't likable, which is also a real accomplishment. This movie handles them with care, but also doesn't tell me, like, you need to like this person. Like, yeah. I think that's a tough needle to thread.
You're right.
And they did it.
You're right. And scoring time. So, Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
Sure. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So, I will go first. Outward appearances for makeup and hair, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, I gave it a 9. Passage of time, I gave it a 7, which I now feel was undeserved, but I don't let myself change scores after I make them. For costuming, I gave it a 9. For quality of the script, 8.5. For accuracy, 7. For storytelling, 8. For production value, 9, which reflects what they were doing on not much, not overall volume. For production, direction, decision-making, 9. Fantastic work for a first feature. And for Do We Care, I gave it a 3, because I hated everyone except Candy in theory, but the problem with Candy is the Stephen Dorff problem. So my total came to 7.85. Sarah?
Okay, outward appearances 9, acting and casting 9, passage of time 4, costuming 7, quality of the script 7, accuracy 6, storytelling 6, production value 8, production direction decision making 8, and Do We Care 3. So,
yep. What's your average?
6.7.
The final score comes to 7.275. I Shot Andy Warhol. We are sorry. You did not earn second opinion, but you are a solid and memorable piece of filmmaking that I remembered in specifics for well over 20 years. Other stuff you should watch instead. I think I Shot Andy Warhol is worth watching, but it's not for everyone. It is currently free on YouTube and also free on some weird Japanese-looking site. I like Forced Entries by Jim Carroll. I love The Velvet Underground, and I love Lou Reed's music. If you just want, like, one sample for the scene, though, I've always loved Nico's cover of I'll Keep It With Mine.
I love Nico's these days. which of course was used very beautifully in Royal Tenenbaums, but it's so beautiful. I would also recommend Pick Your Mary Harron project. She directed obviously this, but also her American Psycho was really incredible. She's also she's done a ton of television, including, she's directed episodes of Big Love and The L Word and 6 Feet Under. She directed a really great TV movie that we'll get to at some point called The Notorious Betty Page. She's a working director. I would love for her to have the opportunity to just do more of her own stuff as much as possible, just because she has such a unique voice. I also think read the SCUM Manifesto. It's fascinating. It's a lot. It is like having Valerie Solanas sit in your house with you. So, page at a time, it's a lot of book. And it's not very long. It is a linguistic assault, but it's certainly worth reading in order to get a better look at her and kind of the thwarted genius that's happening there. I would also in general recommend American Horror Story. I haven't watched the cult season, I think because it came out right after the 2016 election. And I was like, it's too soon. I can't handle it.
Who's also in the Alison Pill, who we loved in Milk.
Oh, love Alison Pill.
The SCUM Manifesto is not for everyone. I do not recommend it for my parents. I would not recommend it for a slew of perfectly delightful people that I know, but I would like to thank you, Sarah, for reading the SCUM Manifesto and for reading the book about Valerie Solanas so that I didn't have to. But just to flashback to a slightly more socially acceptable stream of second-wave feminism, again from Lawrence Leamer. Another period icon, Gloria Steinem, looked at Warhol's pop art with a decidedly feminist view. Suppose a woman painted Campbell soup cans. What would happen to her? Steinem asked. She'd be laughed out of sight, perceived as superficial. It takes a man, and a man with the pretentiousness of Andy Warhol, to make Campbell soup cans into art.
Gloria, love you.
With that moment of Ms. Steinem taking down Mr. Warhol. Sarah, can you take us out?
So just a quick Patreon thank you. As we have mentioned, our podcast baby has matured and is now a toddler. And we have launched a Patreon, simply an effort to defray some of our costs associated with bringing the show to you. Platform hosting, recording, research. Occasionally we have to order a book off the internet. We sometimes pay for movie rentals. We are offering shout outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd like to thank Gates, who signed up already. Thank you, Gates. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And check out our webpage and all of our previous episodes on biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You can see the official ratings of all of our previous episodes, and you can also get in touch with us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about And the Band Played On.
Prepare to be outraged.
Good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night, Rena.
Good night, Sarah.